A visit from my ex. My ex-boyfriend and I met when we were in our final year of high school at a mutual friend's house party. We grew up in the same town, but never had encountered each other prior to this because he went to a different school. Unlike me and my friends, he was not a private school kid. I think that was part of the reason I liked him. I was fascinated by his stories of breaking the rules, but he was so much more than some kin from the wrong side of the tracks. He was the funniest person I've ever met. He also knew everything about golf, so much so that he could hold his own in golf talk with my father. This infuriated my dad because he thought my boyfriend was too rough to know about such a classy sport. As we got older, my boyfriend and I grew apart. I went off to college and he stayed in our hometown. We tried long distance, but he didn't handle it well. He was always into smoking weed, but around this time he started experimenting with other drugs. By the time I was home for Christmas, he was using hard drugs every day. The drugs turned him into a completely different person, making him selfish and unfaithful. I broke up with him after a friend texted me a picture of him making out with some girl in a nightclub. I later discovered that he had cheated on me multiple times. I didn't return to my hometown much after that, but friends would text me updates about him. Several times, he was admitted to the hospital after overdosing. Somebody told me he'd lost his job. Another said he was living on the streets. I couldn't stand the thought of him being reduced to such a pitiful state and did everything I could to keep him out of my mind. This included drug use of my own. One early morning, I stumbled into my dorm room after more than 12 hours of partying. I had taken drugs in an attempt to stay awake and keep drinking, but now it was time for sleep. I passed out on my bed, but was quickly awoken by a hand shaking my shoulder. It was my ex-boyfriend. He looked pretty good. Actually, he looked really good. He looked like I imagined he would look if he never got into drugs. "You don't need to worry about me," he told me. "I'm okay now. It's all good. No more drugs. I'm so sorry I put you through all that. But I'm good now. I've stopped. You need to stop too, before you're made to stop like I was." With that, my phone rang, waking me up. That conversation had been a dream, but it seemed so realistic. I know what you're expecting that phone call to be about, but it was actually a pretty inconsequential call from my friend, wondering if she had left her wallet in my purse. But that other call did come later in the day. My mom was the one who broke the news to me. My ex-boyfriend passed away the night before from an accidental overdose. He had come to me in that dream to apologize and make peace, but I think mainly to warn me against going down the same road as him. And I'm thankful he did. That was 3 years ago, and I haven't touched any drugs since, not even alcohol. Every time I'm in my hometown, I lay a golf ball on his grave and thank him for saving my life, and for the opportunity to spend some of it with him. Number 2. My granddad, the chef. My grandfather developed a love of cooking while serving in the British Army. Officially, he was a navigator, but during his downtime he would sneak into the mess kitchen and help prepare meals for his fellow soldiers. This started as an excuse to hang out with a female cook he had a crush on, but after a while he found himself really embracing the duties of a cook. After a while, he even received formal permission to help out in the kitchen whenever his schedule permitted. After leaving the Army, my grandfather retrained as a chef and eventually opened his own restaurant. He retired before I was born, but I have great memories of him cooking for me as a kid. He made a lot of fancy gourmet dishes, but my absolute favorite meal of his was a classic toasted ham and cheese sandwich. I'm sure it bothered him that I overlooked all of his Michelin star meals in favor of such a simple snack. But he never voiced any disapproval and would make me one whenever I asked. I was 16 when my grandfather died. He left us some cool stuff, but the most meaningful thing to me was a piece of paper dated to the same day he received his cancer diagnosis. It was the recipe for that toasted ham and cheese sandwich that I so loved. That's right, on the very day he learned he was going to die, he sat down and put the recipe into writing so I would never be without his cooking. It turned out that the supposedly simple sandwich my grandfather had been feeding me all those years was a much more complicated affair than I had imagined. Along with the titular ingredients, it required a certain amount of butter, a certain amount of mayo, a certain amount of onions, finely chopped. Then there was salt, pepper, paprika, and a ton of other ingredients that I'm not going to list because I don't want to give away his recipe. These days, I utilize that recipe whenever I can. My niece, Judy, is a particularly big fan of it. She requests it every time I babysit her, and I always oblige. A couple of weeks ago, however, I got the recipe wrong for the first time. I was having a hectic work day. I would have to collect Judy from school, make her favorite sandwich, and then head straight back to the office, leaving her in the care of my fiancé. I hastily prepared the snack as Judy watched cartoons in the other room. I placed the carelessly made sandwich into the toaster and pulled the lever, which immediately popped back up. I swore just softly enough for Judy not to hear me and tried again. Same result. I checked the plug, which was routed into the wall socket, and tried a third time. Once again, the lever popped back up. My only guess was that a fuse had blown, and I did not have the time to fix that, so I opted to do the unthinkable and not toast the sandwich. Judy would have to go with a cold ham and cheese sandwich, just this once. I walked over to the drawer and retrieved my cutting knife. My mind was still focused on work, but that quickly changed when I turned back towards the kitchen counter and saw my grandfather standing beside the toaster. Looking more like a fully physical being than a spirit, he gave me that disapproving but loving stare grandparents give when they want you to know you've done something wrong, but also have some wisdom to impart. So what was that wisdom my dear, departed grandfather wanted to share? I was about to find out. Without taking his eyes off me, he said in his familiar voice, "You forgot the mayo." And that was that. All of a sudden, he was gone. I don't remember a moment where he disappeared. He just wasn't there anymore. But he was right, I had forgotten the mayo. When my wits returned, there was nothing further from my mind than work. All there was making Judy that sandwich and doing it right. I opened it up, added a good dollop of mayo, and, just on the off chance, decided to try the toaster one last time. And this time it worked. When I returned home from work that evening, Judy told me it had been the best toasted ham and cheese sandwich I'd ever made. She still gets excited if I'm in a hurry when I pick her up, because she thinks the secret ingredient that made that particular sandwich so great was stress. I haven't told this story to too many people because it seems so absurd. The last person I shared it with laughed at me and questioned why my grandfather would go through the effort of returning to this world just to make sure somebody put mayo on a sandwich. A lot of people reading this are probably thinking the same thing too, but I don't care. My grandfather loved cooking, no matter what the meal was, and he loved me. I guess seeing me come so close to screwing up a dish that was so deeply personal to both of us was more than he could bear, and he decided to use one of his heavenly day passes to intervene. Thanks, Granddad. Number 1. Big Brother Jacob. My wife and I lost our first baby only a couple of hours after he was born. The weeks and months that followed were agony. The grief was too much for our relationship to bear, and divorce seemed inevitable. A little over a year after our son's passing, a friend persuaded us to spend a week on a Spanish island. She bought the all-inclusive package as a surprise for us because she thought it could save our marriage. And it did. Over the course of that week, we had many open and honest conversations and even made love for the first time since it all happened. Shortly after we returned home, my wife discovered that she was expecting once again. We weren't exactly ecstatic to hear this news. We had been through so much since my wife's last pregnancy, and were both certain this pregnancy would play out the same. If that happened, it would be the death blow to our marriage. But despite our fears, our baby was delivered without incident. We were relieved, to say the least. We decided to name our son Jacob. This was the same name we gave to our first son, but it just seemed right. Deep down, we probably thought this would wipe out the traumatic memories, and we could just pretend our newborn baby was the baby we'd had the whole time. That sounds a bit messed up, I know, but it's how our grieving minds worked. For a little bit, my wife and I were able to go days at a time without thinking about what had happened with our first pregnancy. It wasn't until our son started talking properly that we began really thinking about it again. One day, when Jacob was 6 years old, a colleague of mine stopped by our house. He introduced himself to my son, who said, "You have the same name as my daddy," before adding, "My brother has the same name as me." This almost knocked me off my chair. My wife and I had never told Jacob about his big brother. After keeping it to myself for nearly a week, I told my wife about the incident. Turned out Jacob had made a similar comment to her the following morning. He said something along the lines of, "Daddy has the same name as his friend, just like me and my brother." My wife dug a little further, asking Jacob for more details. He told her that his brother often played with him or comforted him when he was scared at night. "He's a good big brother," Jacob said, before adding, "He was here once, but he couldn't stay." We decided to question Jacob together, but information was not forthcoming. All of our attempts to learn more were met with silence, or by Jacob telling us he didn't remember anything else. But on the morning of his 7th birthday, just as he was about to tuck into his birthday pancakes, he told us, "Jacob eats pancakes sometimes too." Then, as if he realized his mistake, he added, "But he told me not to talk about him, because he doesn't want to make you sad." That was the last time our son ever spoke about seeing his brother. Jacob is a teenager now, and we've told him all about the sibling that came before him. Recently, my wife even asked him about those creepy incidents from his early years, but he claims to have zero memory of them. I believe he's telling the truth, but I can't help but wonder if he's keeping a secret for the big brother that he still talks to. So, those were 3 creepy but heartwarming encounters with deceased family members. Did they leave you with fear in your heart or a tear in your eye? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more scary stories. Although, we can't always promise they'll be served with a side of wholesomeness.